Welcome, Mars Hill Latin students. We are starting our quarter 4, and we're going to have to do a lot of it, it looks like, online. So, let's start in prayer. Pater noster, qui es in caelis, sanctificater nomen tuum. Adveniat regnum tuum. Fiat voluntas tua, sicut in caelo et in terra. Panem nostrem quotidianem da nobis hodie. Et dimite nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris. Et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. All right. Well, we are going to have to find a way to do our normal in-class quizzes online. So expect next week that you will have a quiz that mirrors the way that I do the in-class quizzes in addition to your normal online homework, okay? We are going to need to still test your vocab. But I've got a piece of good news for you. We are going to do a vocab reset. So, starting with the Vulgate readings, which we are starting on page 283 with the reading from Ecclesiastes, you just have to know the vocab for the Ecclesiastes readings for these quizzes, okay? Just to try to make it a little bit easier on you guys. I know that you have a big stack of vocab cards already, and I'm proud of what you've done so far, but this will make it a little bit easier, have a little bit of a reset. Okay, we are starting the Vulgate this week, and that means we're going to jump several hundred years further in the timeline from what we were doing last week with Ovid. We are starting Christian Latin, and that means that we are reading from a translation of the Bible that was done by a guy named Jerome in the 4th and 5th centuries. Jerome is a pretty important church father. He wrote lots of stuff, and he was one of the only church fathers to really be fluent in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And so he put those talents to use and labored. It's really incredible that one guy was able to do it all, but he translated the entire Bible, both Old and New Testaments, into Latin. And that became the standard Latin translation of the Bible in the western half of the Roman Empire for most of the Middle Ages and on through the Renaissance. Okay, now there's a couple different things that you're going to notice with the Vulgate Latin that's a little bit different from the classical Latin that we've read in Livy and Ovid. For one thing, the sentence structure starts to mirror what we see in English, okay? So that gets a little bit easier for you guys. It's a little bit easier to just read from left to right as you normally would. Although, I will still caution you, you can't get away with that completely. You still have to look at the endings of the words and start your translation by identifying what's the subject, what's the verb, what's the direct object, if any, of the verb, what pieces of the sentence do I need, and identify the cases in Latin that would fill those roles. Now, another thing is that Christian Latin starts to use more subordinate clauses to fill roles that would have been filled in classical Latin by things like participles or just an ablative absolute or something like that. Now, Christian Latin still has those tools. You can still use a bare ablative for something like ablative of separation. But we see here in this very first reading that you guys did for this week, the use of de plus the ablative instead of the ablative of separation. So what does man gain from all of his labor? From all of his labor. De is being used in the sense of from there. And that's a little bit new, and we can see the development of Latin in things like that. Now, give you guys a couple hints for this week. First, take a look at amplius. It may seem to you like that us ending is a nominative, masculine, singular, first and second declension adjective, but it's not. If you look at that eus ending, you can see that it's actually a neuter comparative. Okay? So it's more full, more full. And it agrees with the neuter question word at the beginning of the sentence, quid. So what more fullness, you might say, does man have? That's the question. Now, whenever you have a comparative, if I say that Bill is taller than Tom, instead of just Bill is tall, we need that than Tom. Okay? You can't just say Bill is taller, period. Without any context, that doesn't make a ton of sense because you need a taller than what? Than Tom. Okay? Now, in Latin, you normally do that with just a bare ablative. Okay? And here, the than part is a little bit confusing because it's an entire clause. It's the quo clause in line 70. So what more fullness does man have than that he blah, blah, blah? Okay? It's that whole clause, and that wraps us up for this week. Gave you guys a couple hints, a little bit of instructions. Study that vocab. You have a reset. Study this sentence and try to come up with a polished translation. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time. I would be happy to answer your questions, and I can try to put some of the answers to those questions in the video for next week. All right, good luck with this week. I'll see you next week.